She didn't belong there. A scorching desert, a brutal military training course, and the scornful glares of young soldiers. Linda Harper, 49 years old, has no uniform and no rank and is seen as an outsider. They mocked her, calling her the lost old mom. But when blood spilled and lives hung in the balance, who would stand tall? This is the story of a woman underestimated, yet she kept an entire platoon alive without a single boastful word. Welcome to today's stories. Wherever you're watching this video from in the world, we wish you a great day. Consider subscribing to our channel. And let's dive into this story. She shouldn't have been there. It was a survival training course for soldiers, where seasoned troops and young officers were forged to face battlefield pressure. The Arizona Desert Combat School, nestled in the barren wilderness of the American West, was no place for someone like Linda Harper. At 49, she wore no uniform, bore no rank, and carried no symbols of a soldier. She was just a civilian nurse, invited as an advisor, a title that sounded important, but from the start, everyone thought she was just dead weight. In August, the Arizona desert was a furnace. Temperatures hit 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The air so dry that each breath seemed to sap your strength. The training camp sat over 50 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by red rock hills and sparse cactus clumps. This was where reserve forces and battlefield medics were thrust into grueling scenarios, marching under blistering sun, setting up camp in sandstorms, and handling simulated injuries as if lives truly hung in the balance. Linda walked into the camp with an old backpack, plain beige clothes, and a calm gaze. But from the first moment, she was met with skeptical stares. Who's she? Some old mom tagging along with the army, a young trainee, barely in his 20s, whispered to his buddy as Linda passed by. Others snickered, not bothering to hide it. They were young soldiers, proud of their strength and youthful endurance. To them, Linda was an oddity, out of place in a world of guns and iron discipline. Even the officer in charge, Captain Mark Ellison, couldn't hide his irritation when introducing her to the team. This is Linda Harper, civilian advisor. She has experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, he said flatly, as if he himself doubted that experience meant anything here. Linda didn't react. She didn't correct their taunts or explain her years working with NGOs, crossing war zones to save lives. She quietly found a corner in the camp tent, opened her backpack, and checked her medical kit. Vials, bandages, and syringes were neatly arranged, like old friends. While other trainees gathered, swapping combat techniques or bragging about their records, Linda sat alone, reviewing a battlefield medical manual. She didn't try to fit in or prove anything. But her eyes sharp, steady, seemed to take in everything. The first day of training kicked off with a physical test. Trainees had to march 10 miles under the searing sun, carrying 40-pound backpacks. Linda was excused from the test, a decision by Captain Ellison, who deemed her participation unnecessary. Yet she showed up at the starting point, standing in the shade of a large rock, watching each young soldier set out. A few glanced her way, as if to say, "What are you doing here?" Linda just nodded slightly, as if she was used to those looks. At the first team briefing, when officers assigned tasks, Linda was completely ignored. A young sergeant, brimming with confidence, pitched a plan for a simulated scenario, an explosion injuring 3 soldiers. He spoke fast, sketched on a board, and assigned roles to each team member. Linda raised her hand, offering input. She spoke slowly, clearly. If a victim's in circulatory shock, we need to check breathing before moving them. I have a quick diagnostic template. But before she could finish, the sergeant cut her off. "Thanks, Ms. Harper. But this is a real military situation, not a community hospital." A few chuckles echoed in the tent. Linda didn't reply. She lowered her hand, set her notes on the table, and kept listening. That night, while the other trainees slept in the main tent, Linda was assigned a smaller one on the camp's edge. The desert wind howled, carrying the biting chill of night. In the darkness, she sat on an old tarp, checking her trauma kit again. A small flashlight lit her medical tools, and in that faint glow, her face showed an unshakable resolve. She wasn't here for recognition. She was here for a reason she hadn't yet voiced. And in the desert silence, as others slept, Linda Harper stayed awake, ready for something no one, not even she, knew was coming. The sun rose over the Arizona desert like a fireball, scorching everything under its blinding glare. By mid-morning, the temperature had climbed past 110 degrees Fahrenheit, the dry air making every drop of sweat evaporate before it could roll down skin. The Arizona Desert Combat School was no longer an abstract idea, it was a crucible, where each step felt heavier than the last. The trainees, young and fit, began to feel the strain. They marched over rocky paths, lugging heavy backpacks, while officers barked sharp commands. Linda Harper, like a silent shadow, was still there, but nearly invisible to most. She was assigned a tent apart from the main camp, as if her presence was an inconvenience. No one invited her to the evening strategy talks, when trainees gathered around campfires to share stories or debate survival tactics. A few young sergeants, brimming with the confidence of formal military training, eyed her with a mix of curiosity and mockery. During one briefing, when the team split into small groups for a timed camp setup drill, Linda was given no role. She stood at the group's edge, watching the young trainees hurriedly stake tents, tie ropes, and check gear. A sergeant, half joking, turned to her and asked, "Ever held a gun, or do you just do bandages?" The others burst out laughing, as if the question summed up her worth in their eyes. Linda gave a faint smile, her gaze steady. "I do what needs doing," she said, her voice low and even, then turned away, jotting in her small notebook. The environment wasn't harsh just because of the heat or terrain. The training was designed to push everyone to their limits. Simulated battlefield scenarios came one after another, a mock explosion, an ambushed squad, or an injury needing urgent care. Trainees had to react fast, coordinate smoothly, and make split-second decisions. Linda, though unassigned, was always at these simulations. She stood in the back, sometimes just steps away, watching their every move. She noticed a young trainee bandage a wound wrong, letting fake blood flow. She clocked the breathing of a simulated casualty, spotting signs of hemorrhagic shock that the team missed. But she didn't speak up or interrupt unless asked, and no one asked. On the third day, during a team meeting about handling a traumatic brain injury in battlefield conditions, Linda quietly offered a diagnostic checklist. She'd written it the night before, drawn from real cases she'd handled in Iraq. It outlined steps for checking neurological signs, stabilizing the neck, and the critical window for intervention. She placed it on the table in front of the sergeant leading the discussion. He glanced at it, then slid it aside without reading. "Thanks, Ms. Harper," he said coolly, "but this is real military work. We need proven methods." A few trainees nodded, as if agreeing her experience, however real, couldn't match official training protocols. Linda didn't argue. She picked up the checklist, folded it, and tucked it into her pocket. But for a moment, her eyes flashed not with anger, but with the resolve of someone used to being overlooked. She didn't try to fit in or prove herself right. While others competed to show off skills, Linda did small, near-invisible things. She checked her trauma kit every night, ensuring everything was ready. She watched trainees breathing during breaks, spotting who was exhausted despite their efforts to hide it. She noted tiny details about the terrain where shade fell, where cover might be found in an emergency. No one noticed these acts, but they were the habits of someone who'd lived through days where the smallest mistake could cost a life. One afternoon, during a timed medical evacuation drill, a young trainee suddenly turned to Linda. Maybe out of curiosity, maybe to test her, he asked, "Have you ever been in a real war zone, like actually out there, not just in a hospital?" The question hung in the group's silence, all eyes on her. Linda looked up from her notebook, her gaze calm. "I was in Mosul," she said evenly. "When the shelling started, we evacuated an entire field hospital in 20 minutes. She didn't elaborate or brag, just nodded slightly and returned to her notes. The trainee didn't ask more, but his look shifted, as if seeing her for the first time. That night, as the desert sank into biting cold, Linda sat alone in her tent. The faint glow of her small flashlight lit her trauma kit, where she checked each tool with near-ritual care. The wind whistled through the tent's gaps, carrying a sense of isolation. But in that solitude, there was quiet strength. Linda Harper wasn't here to be liked or recognized. She was here because she knew, deep in her heart, that when the defining moment came, she'd be the most ready. And in the desert's silence, while others dreamed of glory, she dreamed only of keeping people breathing. The Arizona desert sky held not a single cloud, just an endless gray-blue dome, pressing down on everything below. Day 4 of the Arizona Desert Combat School pushed everyone into a harsher rhythm. The 115-degree heat was no longer new, but it still slowed every movement, making each step feel pounds heavier. The trainees, used to pressure, showed signs of fatigue, slumped shoulders, glazed eyes during orders. The simulations grew more complex, a mock ambush with multiple casualties, a traumatic brain injury needing immediate care, or a severe dehydration case in the desert. Linda Harper, as always, was there, silently watching from the group's edge, her gaze sharper now, as if waiting for something. During an early morning simulation, the team was tasked with handling a mock injury, a trainee playing a casualty with an open leg wound, fake blood pooling on the sand. The young trainees jumped into action, but their haste led to chaos. One bandage was too tightly, blocking circulation. Another forgot to check the pulse before moving the casualty. The supervising officer's shouts rang out, berating their lack of coordination. Linda stood a few steps away, notebook in hand, her eyes flicking between the trainees. When the casualty showed signs of simulated circulatory shock, she stepped forward, uninvited, with 3 swift moves checking the pulse, starting chest compressions, and adjusting the head's position. She stabilized the situation in 20 seconds. The group fell silent, staring. A young trainee, caught off guard, blurted, "How'd you know to do that?" Linda's reply was low and brief. "I've seen it happen, many times." She said no more, stepping back to her place, as if what she'd done was nothing special. Captain Mark Ellison, the officer in charge, watched it all from a distance. He said nothing, but for the first time, he jotted something about Linda in his notebook. He'd once thought her an outsider, a civilian nurse clueless about battlefield pressure. But now, something in her actions, no fanfare, no hesitation, made him reconsider. Still, he stayed quiet, as if not yet ready to admit he might have misjudged her. At lunch, as trainees gathered under a makeshift tent's shade, a story began to spread. The young trainee who'd asked Linda about Mosul the day before shared what he'd heard from another officer. "She evacuated an entire field hospital during a shelling," he said, voice low, like sharing a secret. Iraq, 2016. "She didn't just bandage, she coordinated a rescue team under fire." Others listened, some nodding, some frowning in doubt. "If that's true, why doesn't she brag?" another trainee asked. The question hung unanswered. Linda, sitting a few meters away, heard it all but didn't react. She just gave a slight nod, as if confirming a truth she didn't need to voice. Linda's mindset was a mystery to those around her. She didn't compete or seek to prove herself. While young trainees vied to impress officers with skills or stamina, Linda focused on one thing: preparation. She always carried her trauma kit, an old canvas bag arranged with near-obsessive precision. Each night, she checked every vial, every bandage, as if they were part of her. She watched trainees breathing during breaks, spotting who hid pain or exhaustion. She noted small environmental details: a rocky crevice for shelter, a path that might lead to water. No one noticed these acts, but they marked someone who'd lived through moments where life and death were seconds apart. In another simulation late that day, the team faced a tougher scenario: a mock explosion injuring 3 casualties with varying wounds. The trainees split up, but chaos erupted. Someone shouted the wrong order, disorienting the team. Linda, at the edge, suddenly spoke, her voice sharp yet calm. "Prioritize the bleeding victim first. Check the femoral artery, now." Her words cut through the noise like a blade. A young trainee, though hesitant, followed. The situation was controlled faster than expected. This time, no one laughed. A few glanced her way, as if starting to see that Linda Harper was more than just a civilian nurse. That night, as the desert sank into darkness, Linda sat alone in her small tent. Her flashlight's faint glow lit her notebook, where she recorded the day's observations. She didn't write about the mockery or disdain. She wrote about heart rates, how a soldier might hide pain, and the time it takes to tie a tourniquet in the desert's silence, with wind whistling through the tent's gaps. Linda Harper remained a solitary figure. But her solitude wasn't weakness. It was the strength of someone who knew that when the defining moment came, she'd stand firm. And in the flashlight's dim light, her calloused, steady hands were ready for what no one else foresaw. Day 5 at the Arizona Desert Combat School began like the others, with searing heat and sharp commands echoing across the desert. The trainees, now accustomed to the brutal pace, moved with more precision, though exhaustion was etched deep in their faces. Linda Harper, as always, stood at the group's edge, her keen eyes scanning every person, every detail. She was no longer entirely invisible. Some trainees now looked at her with quiet respect, though no one spoke it aloud. But no one, not even Linda, could have predicted that today would be more than a simulation. That afternoon, the team was tasked with navigating a rocky hill path for an ambush scenario. An old armored vehicle, used for training, carried them through treacherous curves. The engine roared, dust billowing under the wheels. Linda sat in the back, her trauma kit on her lap, her gaze tracking the terrain outside. She noticed the path was narrower than before, flanked by jagged rock outcrops. But she said nothing. This was just an exercise, and she had no authority to question the officer's plan. Then it happened in a flash. The vehicle suddenly lost control, its front wheels skidding on gravel, metal screeching as it careened down a short slope. The world tilted, Dust and sand erupted as the vehicle rolled onto its side, halting with a piercing screech. Screams rang out, but for the first few seconds, no one grasped what had happened. This wasn't a simulation. This was real. 3 trainees were unconscious, blood streaming from one's forehead. Another, the young sergeant who'd once mocked Linda, clutched his leg, blood gushing from a deep gash in his thigh. A femoral artery injury, a lethal bleed if not treated immediately. Panic erupted. Some trainees tried to drag their comrades from the wreckage, but their clumsy moves worsened the injuries. Captain Ellison, despite his experience, was stunned in those first moments, shouting unclear orders. No one knew what to do, except Linda. She leapt from her seat, trauma kit already open, her voice slicing through the chaos like a razor. This is real. We have a bleed out in 90 seconds. She knelt beside the injured sergeant, her hands applying a tourniquet to his thigh with the speed and precision of someone who'd done it hundreds of times. The bleeding stopped. She turned to the 3 nearest trainees, issuing orders without hesitation. You keep his head elevated. You open his airway. You get me a tube for intubation now. No one argued. For the first time, the team moved as one, following her every command. Linda shifted from one casualty to the next, checking pulses, stabilizing necks, and ensuring airways were clear. She performed CPR on an unconscious trainee, counting compressions with absolute focus, as if the world had narrowed to just her and the person before her. Dust hung in the air, the groans of the injured mixing with the desert wind, but Linda didn't waver. She was the center of calm, the one keeping everything from collapsing. When the medevac helicopter arrived, just 12 minutes after the crash, Linda was still performing CPR on the last casualty. Sweat streamed down her forehead, but her hands didn't tremble. The helicopter's medical team stepped out, taking in the scene a frantic group of trainees, 3 stabilized casualties, and Linda, the woman without a uniform, orchestrating it all. They didn't ask questions, just nodded and took over. Linda stepped back, making way for the rescue team, but her eyes tracked each casualty loaded onto the chopper. She counted their breaths, even as they left her reach. Silence spread as the helicopter vanished into the sky. The remaining trainees stood there, some still trembling, others staring at Linda as if truly seeing her for the first time. Captain Ellison, his face still pale, approached her. He said nothing, just placed a hand on her shoulder for a moment, then turned away. No one mentioned the earlier mockery or the times they'd dismissed her. But in their eyes, something had shifted. Linda, as always, sought no recognition. She checked her trauma kit, wiped the blood from her hands, and stood there, in the desert, an unshakable figure. In the blistering heat of the afternoon, as the dust settled and the helicopter's hum faded to a distant drone, Linda Harper remained herself quiet, resolute, ready. She didn't need a rank to lead. She needed only her hands and a heart that knew no fear. The Arizona desert sky turned a blazing orange as the sun set, painting the Rocky Hills red and easing the daytime's scorching heat. The Arizona Desert Combat School was quieter now, but the air remained heavy after the accident. The overturned armored vehicle still lay there, a scar on the gravel path, a reminder of how thin the line between simulation and reality could be. The trainees back at the main camp bore the marks of shock and exhaustion. But they all knew one thing: no one died today, and they owed that not to a military commander, but to Linda Harper, the woman without a uniform. News of the accident spread quickly through the camp. The 3 injured trainees, including the young sergeant who'd once mocked Linda, were taken to the nearest military hospital. Initial reports confirmed all three would survive, thanks to the swift intervention at the scene. Details of how Linda took charge applying tourniquets, performing CPR were whispered among the trainees like an unbelievable tale. A young soldier, who'd held a casualty's head at her command, told his teammate she knew exactly what to do, like she'd seen it all before. No one laughed, no one doubted. Their silence now carried a different weight: respect. The next day, at the training course's closing briefing, the mood in the main tent was heavy but solemn. Captain Mark Ellison, who'd once questioned Linda's value, stood before the team, his voice low and clear. He didn't dwell on the accident but spoke of preparation and instinct that saved lives. He didn't name Linda, but his glance toward her said everything. After his speech, a young lieutenant, who'd once thought Linda redundant, approached her. He stood tall, as if reporting to a superior, and said, "I've seen many leaders, but you're the first I'd follow without orders." Linda just nodded, her expression unchanged. She didn't need praise, but that brief moment was a quiet acknowledgement. The briefing ended with an unexpected gesture. The camp's highest-ranking officer, Colonel Robert Klein, stepped forward. He carried no medals or grand words. Instead, he placed a handwritten note before Linda. "We need you to lead next year's battlefield medical training," he said, his voice steady but weighty. The room fell silent, as if witnessing something greater than an invitation. Linda looked at the note, folded it, and tucked it into her worn trauma kit. She said nothing, only nodded slightly. But in that gesture was a resolve that needed no words. When Linda left the camp the next morning, she carried no hero's glow. There was no cheering crowd, no farewell ceremony. She walked away with her old backpack, plain beige clothes, and the same calm gaze as her first day. But something had shifted in how the trainees saw her. A few nodded as she passed, and some whispered thanks. The injured sergeant, still in the hospital, sent word through a teammate, "You saved me, I won't forget." Linda only smiled, saying nothing. She wasn't here to be remembered. She was here to keep people breathing. On the main tent's wall, after she left, a handwritten line appeared in black ink. "The one who wasn't in uniform but kept us breathing." No one knew who wrote it, but it stayed there, a silent testament. Linda Harper needed no rank, no medal. Her honor lay not in outward symbols but in her calloused hands, her fearless heart, and the lives she'd preserved. As the vehicle carrying Linda left the desert, dust trailed behind its wheels, blending into the fiery sunset. She gazed out the window, her eyes distant, as if recalling days in Mosul, Afghanistan, or moments spent on the edge of life and death. She didn't seek glory, but glory found her in the quietest way, and in the desert silence when all was done. Linda Harper remained herself a silent hero, needing no one to know her name, but forever remembered by those she saved. The Arizona desert, as the sunset faded, gave way to a deep black sky glittering with stars. The wind whistled through the rocky crevices, a whisper from this harsh land where Linda Harper left a mark she never sought. The Arizona Desert Combat School returned to its routine new training courses, new faces, new challenges. But in the main tent, on the weathered wooden wall, the handwritten words remained, "The one who wasn't in uniform but kept us breathing." They didn't fade, as if the desert itself wanted to preserve the story of the woman who needed no rank to become a legend. No one held a ceremony for Linda Harper. There were no long speeches, no shining medals, no crowds gathered to see her off. When she left the camp, only a few eyes followed, a few silent nods from those who'd once doubted her. But in that silence was a weight no words could capture. The trainees who'd mocked her now retold the story of the day the vehicle flipped, of how she shouted through the chaos, of hands that didn't tremble while tying a life-saving tourniquet. They didn't know much about her, not the dark days she'd survived in Mosul, not the nights she stayed up checking her trauma kit. But they knew one thing: she made them believe honor wasn't in a uniform, but in action. At the military hospital, the young sergeant who'd been injured recovered. He, who'd once called her the old mom trailing the army, now kept a small note in his pocket. On it, he'd written, "Ms. Harper, I'm alive because of you." He never got to give it to her, but he carried it. A reminder of the day he nearly lost everything and the woman who pulled him back. The others in the team, though silent, carried a change within. They looked at their comrades differently, listened more closely, and learned to observe as Linda had, not just to look, but to truly see. Linda, now far from the desert, never returned to check if anyone remembered her. She went back to her life, likely still a civilian nurse, still carrying her worn trauma kit, still ready for the next moment someone needed her. But her story didn't end. It spread not through loud headlines or flashy articles, but through whispers among soldiers, notes in training manuals, the words on the tent wall. The one who wasn't in uniform but kept us breathing. Those words became a reminder, not just of Linda, but of other silent heroes who don't need a spotlight to change the world. In the desert stillness, as night fell and stars burned bright, Linda Harper's message echoed. True honor doesn't need to be shouted. It's proven by hands ready to act, a heart unafraid of danger, and silence when the work is done. Linda never sought glory, but glory carved her name into the hearts of survivors. The desert's dust, and a story that would be told forever, under Arizona's star-filled sky. Linda Harper's story ended not with applause, but with reverent silence, the silence of unsung heroes who need no spotlight to shine. She was proof that honor lies not in uniforms or titles, but in hands ready to save, in a steadfast heart amid the storm. Each of us somewhere could be a Linda Harper, doing what's right when no one's watching. If this story touched you, share it to spread the spirit of silent heroes. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories, and leave a comment. What do you think makes someone a hero? We want to hear your thoughts. See you in the next video.